Hear that? It's SpringFest savings calling your name, only at Lowe's. Right now, get a free Select Ego 56-volt battery when you buy a Select Ego trimmer, blower, or mower. Plus, get your choice of any 2 bags of Miracle Grow organic soil mix for only $16. Shop these can't-miss deals in-store or online today. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 4/2. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. Excludes Hawaii.
Today on CityCast Boise. Housing prices in our area have been on a wild ride, making homeownership feel impossible for many. We're revisiting our conversation with a local realtor to dig into the facts, bust some myths, and share practical tips for hopeful buyers. It's Wednesday, April 2nd. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Today, I'm chatting with Tom Wheeler, a local real estate agent who specializes in helping first-time home buyers. Thanks for coming on the show, Tom.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So this market is hot. Everything's moving. Let's just jump into it. Before we get into all of your tips and expertise and resources, what's the market like for first-time home buyers right now?
Good question. I mean, it's a loaded question. We always start with what is your current situation and how do we tailor that question to your current needs? If you're in a place where your rent's continually increasing, then that conversation might go differently than if you're in a place where, hey, I'm in a place where I love where I live and my rent has not increased, or I'm living with parents and saving money. So that kind of is situational.
So what are some of the factors for buyers or market factors that go into your analysis for first-time home buyers about what they should be looking for, what they should expect?
So we always start with, what are you currently paying? Because again, kind of how we just mentioned, if you're paying $2,500 or $2,000 a month in rent, you clearly can afford a decent amount for your living costs. And in that case, let's talk about how that might translate into homeownership. We also start with employment history. I mean, having a job is going to be important for a lender to qualify that person on a mortgage. So did you just start a job? Do you have a letter of employment that gives you a sense of what your salary is? There's ways we can work around that. So if you are just out of school and you have an offer letter for a new employer, that will work. You don't have to be working for 24 months in that scenario. But some scenarios, the lender, the bank that borrows money to you for the purchase of a home, is going to ask that you have some employment history. So we talk about employment history, and we also talk about credit. So we can go into credit, right? And why it's the system that can be discriminatory and has issues, and really, it's this huge convoluted thing because we don't all have a general understanding of how it works. But it unfortunately is a metric that lenders require for qualifying folks. So we get an understanding of where you are with your current credit score, and in partnership with a great lender, we can talk about ways to increase your credit score that won't affect you negatively.
And it seems like, okay, what I'm reading in the news or reading in different articles is that the housing market isn't as frantic as it was maybe in the early years of COVID, but maybe it's not exactly balanced either because there's not enough inventory. Is that maybe a correct assessment of the situation?
Yeah, that's definitely correct. I mean, 2020, 2021, I remember we would stand in line on the outside of properties to wait to get in. And at that point, there were already offers on the properties. Of course, that was when interest rates were below 3%. And really, that made housing so much more affordable for folks, and there was many more buyers in the market. So it has simmered down from then. I mean, you used to look at the map of available listings, you'd have one in each little area. Now we do have more inventory. However, we're still lacking inventory, like you mentioned. Builders are still behind in building units to create that inventory. However, the market has been interesting in the last 6 months for sure. There's more listings than we've had in a while, but I think buyers have been a bit on the fence because rates are higher. I mean, historically, they're still quite low. So I think the challenge we've had in communicating and discussing interest rate with buyers is that, yeah, you heard that they were once 2.5% and 3%. Unfortunately, we don't expect to see that again in our lifetimes. Who knows, right? Maybe if there's another global pandemic or something that really shatters our economy and allows the market to sustain lower interest rates. But unfortunately, we kind of have to let go of that expectation and live in in the present moment, which is that interest rates at this point are hovering around 6. And that's, again, historically speaking, not terrible. People get really hung up on interest rate, and that's totally fair. However, let's focus on payment, because there's ways to get payment where it needs to be, regardless of where rate is.
And you really focus on working with first-time homebuyers and LGBTQ homebuyers. Why are you drawn to focusing on this group of buyers or clients?
Oh my gosh, it's such a passion of mine. I think in the advent of selling sunset and the $1 million listing, first, there's a bunch of realtors in the market, and there's low barriers to entry, rather. And so we have a lot of realtors in the space who want to get into real estate and make a bunch of money and be on selling sunset. And unfortunately, those clients and the marketing efforts that are put out are generally for that luxury lifestyle. And the reality is that doesn't happen overnight, and that's not realistic. The reality is, as my role as a realtor is my role in the community is to go out and make sure that folks see themselves represented in the process and make sure everyone participates in the conversation. And as it pertains to underrepresented communities and the LGBTQ community, I mean, Black folks for sure have been, and it's historically, it's factual, have been excluded from the real estate process into the 60s. So generational wealth is a real thing. And there's still discrimination that happens today by both realtors and lenders and anyone involved in the process that further perpetuates that issue.
No, I really love that, because that was a situation I found myself in about a decade ago, where I was like, I've got to be saving. I don't have near enough savings for a down payment. There's no way, like our rental was going to be converted and go for sale. And so I just thought, what are we even going to do? And I had a friend who happened to be a realtor who said, hey, just talk about it. Let's just see. And it turns out we were able to buy a house, which I thought we were years and years and years away from doing. So I really think that's cool that you're taking the time to do that, because that really does impact people. That impacted my family so much. What are places that people should start looking, or places that are more affordable for people who aren't making, 6 figures or lots and, loads of cash?
Great question. Yeah. Well, I think that I produced Canyon County Pride, and a part of that was a nonprofit I was volunteering for down there. But another part of it was I was taking so many of my LGBTQ folks and my folks who didn't make 6 figures, and not that those are the same things, but folks who are just not, who are either underrepresented, who just have additional barriers to the process and to affordability, which is, let's be real, most of us, right? There's a lot of folks moving from out of state, selling their homes in the West Coast for 3 times the average sale price here, and they can easily afford. But our local Idahoans who, are teachers and who are working at the airport and working at your local coffee shop, like they are struggling to get into the market, because right now the average price in Boise is $550 to $600. That's insane. I mean, that's drastically changed from even 5 years ago. So with that, Canyon County was a big inspiration for creating opportunities for folks. This week alone, I've gotten 2 clients under contract in homes in Canyon County for around $300,000 with seller paid closing costs. So that's reducing the cash to bring into closing. And those are payments that are less than $2,000 a month.
And I think one of the biggest factors, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the biggest factors for people outside of maybe price or, cost per month is this issue of location. And so definitely, you mentioned Canyon County. What are some areas in the Treasure Valley that are more affordable for buyers?
Well, like you said, West Boise. So the West Bench is an area that is really up and coming, and there's lots of opportunity. So I would say the Bench, West Boise, parts of Garden City, Northwest Boise.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit temptationstreats.com to learn more.
Tom, a recent study came out that showed that Idaho is the second most unaffordable state to buy a house in, with keeping wages in mind, wages compared to cost of housing. How is this impacting buyers? Do you see this really impacting people and making them feel like they can't buy a house, or has it not really had that much of an impact?
I do think that it affects sentiment in the market. I think you talk about the majority of folks who just continually stay renting because of convenience and because of comfortability. I do think that sentiment has an impact on folks saying, hey, maybe I should consider buying. And at the same time, again, if you're open to being flexible, I mean, we always have a T chart of like wants and needs, right? And you might just have to give up some of those wants. The needs, we're going to shoot for. So that's square footage, that's bedrooms, bathrooms, garage, location. We're going to try and work with that. But yeah, I think that those stories and affordability in general it affects buyer sentiment for sure.
And I think there's this idea, I really want to clarify if this is accurate, but there's this idea that the further you get from Boise, like into Meridian, into Nampa, the more affordable houses are. So is that really accurate? And if it is accurate, what are buyers able to get like in Nampa that they might have to compromise or just not get if they want to buy a house in Boise?
Yeah, I think that's more or less true. I mean, you look at any big city, right? If you're in the center of that city, the farther you go out, the more affordable it might be. And I think Boise is often compared to Austin 20 years ago. So we have the river going down the middle of the city. We have the green belts. We have all these great things happening in Boise. And the reality is there's cranes downtown building more and more apartments and building more and more infrastructure. And I think we have to accept that we're in a city that's growing faster than we can keep up with. And then part of that is accepting you might have to live a little bit farther out of town.
So, in the same vein of compromises or what people can expect, if people are really looking at living in Boise or, any part of Boise, what kind of things can they expect at about a $400,000 house?
I think around that 400,000 price point, you can expect to probably be on the smaller side of things, right? Like it's maybe not a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, but it's probably a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, or a combination of that. And it may need some cosmetic work. So part of the buying process is, a lot of folks think it's the fun part is browsing on Zillow and doing tours. But once you identify the home and you've made an offer and you get that offer accepted, then we really begin the legwork and the due diligence of, for example, the inspection. And so I think a lot of first-time buyers will be freaked out, like, oh, that home is listed so low. Like, is there a problem? Well, we won't know until we do our due diligence and have the inspection. And so that's something we take very seriously. But I think in the 400 range, yeah, you might be painting some walls, doing some carpet. And in my experience, having done those things myself, not only do you gain instant equity, but you also, as a homeowner, get a sense of pride in that, hey, I installed some new counters with some friends and like saved a bunch of money. And now when I sell it, it's updated. And those things are really rewarding.
And we talked on this podcast a couple of weeks ago about the trend in homes in this area that they're actually shrinking, that the houses are having smaller square footage and maybe less shared space, like no formal dining room or no formal sitting room or living room. Do you feel like your clients are getting less house but paying more these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think there's a trend of even the uber wealthy who buy big homes, like that's just not as much of a thing. Like no one wants 10,000 square feet anymore. Even like our luxury market does not have, you're not seeing like huge spaces being done. It's just, I think that's a little bit going away. But yeah, I think that people are purchasing with location in mind more than they are square footage. And again, it's situational. So if you have a growing family, you're going to be really conscious of, does it have that third bedroom? It's also post 2020. Everyone now works out at home or works from home. And so a 3-bedroom, 2-bath is not the same in 2024 as it was in 2015, because that third bedroom, which used to maybe be a guest bedroom or a playroom, is now that space that's utilized for the office or for the gym. And that's become a very real need in people's searches. So I would say the 4-bed is the new 3-bed.
Oh, that's a really interesting way to look at it. We've touched on it before, but I definitely know, talking to people, the high interest rates have scared people when it comes to home buying. So what are rates that new buyers should be looking for if they're seriously contemplating getting into the buying process?
Well, one thing is, I think folks, when they start the process, can be a bit overwhelmed because it's like, hey, talk to this lender or this bank or go to this credit union. And the reality is, a lot of the rates and a lot of the closing costs are going to be comparable. You might have a credit union who has a 5.5% rate and a bank that has a 5.75 rate. And the reality is, you still have to consider closing costs. So the rate that's 5.75 might have a little bit less in closing costs, whereas the credit union that has a 5.5 might be a little bit more expensive in closing costs. So you always want to request a net sheet so you can kind of see all the numbers. You see the rate, but then you also see the fees that are associated with closing the loan. Because I know for myself, when I've purchased, you're like, oh, I'm going to go ask that person. I'm going to go ask that bank. I'm going to go ask that credit union. And it gets overwhelming because they're all kind of floating similar numbers and closing costs. So that makes an impact. The other thing that buyers should be aware of is that right now, with more inventory in the market, sellers are having to make more concessions. And you actually get more bang for your buck asking the seller to contribute, let's say $10,000 towards your closing costs, than you would by reducing the purchase price by $10,000. That reduces your cash out of pocket. So there's ways that we can craft the scenario that makes sense for buyers, and I think that that's just not readily available to folks unless you're having a conversation to see how it makes sense for you.
Yeah, what are some, I mean, that's a tip I didn't know about. What are some other resources or tips that it would be good for first-time homebuyers to know, that maybe would make putting a down payment more accessible or buying more accessible?
Yeah, another one is, so if you're an Idaho first-time home buyer, Idaho Housing offers a program with as little as 0.5% down. And what
Oh,
that means
wow.
is you can literally bring as little as 0.5% of the total purchase price to closing in the form of your down payment. Now, of course, what that also means is you're borrowing your down payment. So you'll have your first mortgage, which is the mortgage for the property itself, and you'll have a second mortgage, which is for borrowing the down payment. But that does allow you to bring very minimal cash to closing. And so I have clients right now who they're going to sell. They bought in 2021 and they're going to move. And when they move, they're going to pay off that first mortgage and that second mortgage. But they were able to get into a home for a few $1,000s. And I don't think that's a program that most folks are aware of, that because the misconception is, oh, I need to have tens of thousands of dollars and no debt to be able to purchase. The reality is, you can own a home for as little as a few $1,000s, 0.5% of the total purchase price.
Okay, I've also heard about a Heroes program. Who is that for, and what does that mean, or what could that mean for people looking to buy a home?
Yeah, great question. So Idaho Housing and Finance, which is the group that is an Idaho-specific program that offers homebuyers an option to purchase homes for as little as 0.5% down. They also offer a Heroes program, which waives that minimum 0.5% down payment required, and also allows folks to, in some cases, come to closing with as little as $0 down. So that's similar to your VA loan. It's essentially a special product for teachers, veterans, and other folks kind of within different areas of work, that allows you to bring minimal down, and then it can additionally come with a little bit lower rate. So it's really incentivizing those local folks who are teachers, firefighters, service workers who generally aren't paid, in my opinion, what they should be, and which with higher housing costs can make it a little bit tougher on those folks.
Okay, Tom, I also have, this might be a controversial question, but I'm hoping you'll jump into it with me. So I still hear people talking about the fact that they're going to wait to try to buy a house until there's a market crash. They're waiting for a crash like 2008. Is that something that is realistic for people to be waiting for before they buy a house?
Insert sigh from local realtor who experiences this question regularly. Most Americans have tens of thousands of dollars of equity in their home. So that's kind of the first indicator or factual evidence that we wouldn't experience what we did in 2008. The reason 2008 was as a disaster as it was is because folks were being lent money when they really weren't qualified and they had no skin in the game. So lending laws are so much more strict as they used to. Ask anyone who's ever applied for a loan. I mean, you get everything about your taxes, your employment, and that just wasn't the case at that time. So the reality is, because values in homes have continued to increase, people have a lot of equity in their homes. And so if they were to potentially go into foreclosure or default, they'd at least have some funds in the form of equity that would save them from foreclosure, which is not the case in 2008. So the short answer is no, we don't anticipate that. And the saying goes, you should buy real estate and wait, not wait and buy real estate, because the reality is they're not making more of it. They're not making more land, and things are continuing to grow. And again, I think for folks who are waiting, let's just have a conversation and run the numbers, because it's not getting cheaper, unfortunately, and neither is rent, right? So
no,
it's just one of those things where we kind of have to rip the Band-Aid off and get you in a home so you can start partaking in that generational wealth.
Yeah. And so, that was maybe a once in a lifetime thing. I definitely don't want to repeat it, but waiting on a crash that's not coming is maybe not the best strategy.
Right. I agree.
So, Tom, we're going to link some of the resources and programs that you talked about in our show notes. Is there anything else that first-time homebuyers absolutely should know about if they're trying to get in the market?
What folks should know is that, hey, you can partake and you belong in the conversation, and you'd be surprised at the ability you have to own real estate. And so if you don't let your limiting beliefs get in the way of at least calling me for a conversation, because what we do especially well is build community. And so you come in the fold, and even if you don't buy for 3 years, come be a part of what we're doing and partake in the conversation. And when the time comes, you'll have a resource for that. I think knowledge is power, and there's so many misconceptions, like we've said multiple times in this episode, where don't let that get in the way of at least having a conversation. You are enough. I think people feel insecure of oh, well, my credit score is not 800 and I have debt from, something that happened. It's hey, I get it. And we're all human. And this is a judgment-free, safe space to have a conversation about housing, and reach out. Let's do that.
Oh, Tom, thank you so much. I think that is fantastic advice, and I hope people are inspired to join the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review. It helps other people find us. We'll be back tomorrow morning with our pettiest Boise gripes. You won't want to miss it.